Fantasy Football Podcast with your host, Nick Anderson.
What is up, Dynasty Degenerates? This is your host, Nick Anderson, with the Down and Dirty Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, or as you know it, the Triple D FFP. And guys, I am so excited to have a special guest with us today to break down these rookie and wide receiver bracket challenges that we've got. It's my personal pleasure to be able to introduce Etan Mozia from the Dynasty Diagnostic. What's up, Etan? Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey man, I'm super glad to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a blast. This is going to be really, really fun because we have a lot of rookies where the depth is there, I guess, in this class, but there are, I guess, mixed discussions on whether or not the quality is the same all throughout it. So being able to put, one by one, side by side, and really help people make those decisions, I think is going to be a very, very valuable resource for all your listeners, man.
Heck yeah, man. All right, so, we'll just get it started off just talking about you guys a little bit. You're from the Dynasty Diagnostic, which is, you guys are with Dynasty Trade Calculator, right?
Yep. We started independence, I think, December 2018, and about 6 months into it, got acquired by DTC. And so, yeah, that's where you can find all of our shows now, although we also have a bit of a private channel that you'll be able to get some of our I guess not less recent shows as well.
Okay. Heck yeah, man. And you guys, I just kind of throwing this out there, man. It had to be crazy. You guys just had Matt Berry on the show. How was that?
Man, talk about deer in headlights. Like, that was a situation where, I'm just sitting there like trying to figure out what to say, how to not sound like an idiot the entire time I'm recording with him. But the thing about Matthew Berry, and that I found with a lot of people that I've interviewed in the dynasty space and the fantasy space, is all these guys are real people. All these guys remember what it felt like to be a guy trying to come up just like we are. And for that reason, they're super gracious with their time, super gracious with what they are able to bring to your podcast. So he was actually one of those guys that was really, really laid back, really, really easy to talk to. And I just encourage everyone in this space, if you're looking to build a little bit, if you're looking to grow a little bit, take a shot. Go out and reach out to some of these guys that maybe you think are out of your reach. And I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be disappointed, and you might even have made a friend in the space.
Well, heck yeah, man. I can 100%, agree with that sentiment, because I would have never thought, because before I started the podcast, I was a subscribing member of the Dynasty Trade Calculator. I listened to you guys' podcast. So, I completely just agree with everything that you just said, because I would have never thought that I would have got somebody whose podcast I was listening to, 6 months ago on my show. So it's awesome. Like I said, I can't imagine how cool it had to be to have Matthew Berry on there. It was super cool to get to listen to the podcast, because he was talking about so many things about what he did that made him unique. And he's a great guy, man, and just great insight on it. So everybody should go listen to that podcast if they get the chance. Yeah, but so let's just dive right in. Today we've got our running back and wide receiver bracket challenges. We're down on the loser side of the bracket right now, so I can refresh you on what's going on. The competitors that we've got going up against each other are our wide receivers with Michael Pittman and Henry Ruggs III, and then our running backs, we've got Zach Moss versus Anthony McFarland. And so to preface this at the start, I did a sweeping declaration over the week. I decided that we're knocking A.J. Dillon out of there. I'm tired of watching his film. It bores me. He goes down too easy on contact, and I don't like what people have to say about him. I'm sure he's a great guy. But we are throwing Anthony McFarland into the ring now. It's unfortunate that he already had to default lose the first round, but he's going to go up against Zach Moss today. But aside from that, we're going to start right up with Michael Pittman versus Henry Ruggs, and we're jumping in with Michael Pittman first off, all right?
Let's go.
Yeah, let's get it going. So Michael Pittman, he is a big-bodied wide receiver in this draft. He is 6'4", 223 pounds, and he plays like it out there, man. He has 32.5-inch arms with 9.25-inch hands. Those hands equate out to be a strong catch point. He attacks the ball. Is that something that you've seen when you're going through with him?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Michael Pittman is everything you would want from a contested catch wide receiver. My issue with contested catch wide receivers, though, is this. something has to have gone wrong for that to be a contested catch in the first place. Because if you can make separation on your own, then you don't necessarily need to rely on contested catches. And that is where I think that oftentimes people kind of get sidetracked with looking at people's contested catch abilities, just not really contextualizing the whole picture of why they had to be in the position to make that contested catch in the first place. And he's a prime example. I mean, he's a guy that pretty much has all the physical tools that you would want. 4.52 40-yard dash, 111.2 speed score, 58th percentile burst score. But I mean, that is kind of a given his size. A lot of people are probably going to comp this guy to Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans has a second gear a little bit more than this guy does. But the thing that worries me is on 9 routes and on 8 routes, this guy isn't a guy that really makes that separation. So he finds himself in situations where the defender is bearing down on him. And in college, 223, 6'4", you're going to be bigger than everybody else you're going against. But when it comes to the NFL, that's not always going to be the case. So if you can't rely on that physical ability, you have to rely on the nuance of your routes and the way that you, again, separate. So I hope we see a little bit of advancement when it comes to his game in that particular area. That said, I mean, if you're looking for a big-bodied guy that's going to run block, that's going to, actually have a DB, like wonder if he has to make a business decision at the line and just let this guy go, then yeah, you're looking at Michael Pittman.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. I completely agree with that. Like you said, his route running is not the benchmark of what he puts out there on the field. It's his aggression. I mean, shit, when we're talking about aggression with this guy, I've seen him out there on the field get pass interference calls because he's just going at D-backs. I don't know if he's angry or what's going on, but I mean, he's just super, super aggressive. But you're right, he lacks a little bit in the route running ability. But let's go forward. Let's look a little bit at his career out at USC. So his freshman year, he didn't have a lot to bring to the table. His sophomore year, same as the first. He kind of had a lackluster sophomore year. But his junior year, which was his breakout year, at 20.9 years old, he had 41 receptions with 758 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, followed up by a stellar senior year with 101 receptions, 1,275 receiving yards, and 11 touchdowns. But so, I mean, those are pretty good numbers when we're looking at his senior year.
Absolutely. But I mean, everything you said before that kind of has to be taken into this as well. His breakout age is only 20.9. It's basically a 21-year breakout age. That's 39th percentile of this draft class. So there's been a lot of studies done on breakout age, done on what these guys' market share of total receiving yards and touchdowns was in the NFL, and we didn't really see him break out until he absolutely had to be the guy to break out when the other talent around him that was playing with him those first 3 years started to dissipate, and he became the go-to guy. Now, I'm not necessarily going to say that this is a bad thing for him. I don't think that one statistic is all there is to any prospect. But I will say that this might be a receiver that takes a couple of years in the NFL to actually get his feet wet and actually start to produce like we think that he can. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was the number one bully off the line, winning contested catch scenario wide receivers coming out of the draft last season, and he had all the opportunity in the world this season because the Philadelphia Eagles were starting Greg Ward at wide receiver. So the fact that he wasn't able to break out in that situation where he had essentially all the opportunity to be able to go and do what he does leads me to start to look at these guys again in a different way. And with Dynasty, for me, the number one thing in Dynasty and rookie draft picks, and the reason that I actually don't often go wide receiver in the first round of rookie drafts is because I want an immediate return when I'm investing a draft pick, right? So if I am going to be spending my first round pick on a guy, I want it to be a running back in a decent situation that is going to get opportunity. Why? Because he's only competing against one other guy on the team, realistically. There's not, 2 other wide receivers or 3 other wide receivers with them on the field. And 2, because at the end of that year, his value is going to have risen. The chances that a wide receiver's value is going to have risen in just the year that he's been in the NFL after spending that first round pick on him it's kind of low when you actually look at the numbers. So For me, I think that this is definitely a guy that you should be looking to target later in your rookie drafts, maybe a round 3 pick, around 4 pick in Superflex leagues, especially. But that doesn't mean that I'm not interested. That just means that I think it's going to take some time for him to put it together.
Yeah, that's super interesting because the whole JJ Arcega Whiteside parallel, I hadn't thought of that coming into this podcast, because I've just when I get so sucked into the tape and watching what's going on, in the microcosm of the college setting that I don't think about sometimes about how it translates into the NFL. And JJ Arcega Whiteside is a great example of that because I picked him as my Mr. Irrelevant at a draft last year, thinking that I was smooth, I thought he was going to turn into something and then just let me down every time he got the opportunity. So that's a really good point when we're looking at a guy like this. The one thing that I like about him is that he's got a football lineage. His father was Michael Pittman Sr. He played running back for the Cardinals, Bucks, and Broncos. That kind of, for me, it's just like a little intangible, just like a little nugget, a little Easter egg that you find in there that shows that he might have a higher football IQ than the next guy. I mean, you can look at some of these people. The Mannings are an obvious example, but that's, high level shit. But then we look at somebody like a Christian McCaffrey. You had Ed McCaffrey as a dad. It seems like when you're dealing with those football lineages that they have a little bit of a higher football IQ. I mean, I would have hoped that would have translated into an earlier breakout age, but I guess we can't exactly guarantee that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Of course. But I mean, I think that is definitely an underappreciated positive. I really like that you included that in discussing Michael Pittman because, yeah, I mean, just being in those situations where you're in the locker room with, guys that are already famous and, guys that you look up to, and you've already experienced that at a young age. So when you walk into that situation in any locker room, you are kind of already okay with it. You don't necessarily have to go through the learning curve of, okay, first being starstruck and then realizing these guys are guys you're actually competing against, and then realizing that not only are you competing against these guys, now it's your turn to go and potentially take somebody's job on that team. Like, there's a lot of mind games that go into it. So you bringing up the football lineage, I think that definitely matters. And then I'll also say this just to rile up anybody that's listening. I'm a Broncos fan, so Ed McCaffrey is the better McCaffrey and will be for the rest of time.
Hey, man. Actually, I was watching a documentary series on, I think it might have been on Facebook that I came across it. It was just like a little blip about, did you hear about Ed McCaffrey cutting up his jersey and all that stuff?
No, dude, you got to tell me about that.
Okay, so Ed McCaffrey had this compulsion. It was to the point of where it was like OCD, where he would cut little pieces out of his jersey. If you go look back, if you Google his cleats, you can see holes in his cleats about that big on the back end because he would wear smaller cleats and cut out the rear so he could be faster. And I guess growing up in the McCaffrey household, if you got jersey tackled, it was a sin to get jersey tackled in the McCaffrey household because you were supposed to be wearing your stuff skin tight. He went to the Pro Bowl and they said they gave him this big, heavy jersey, because it wasn't custom fit for him. And by the next morning, he had stayed up all night and there was like red confetti all over the place because he had cut the jersey into pieces trying to make it lighter.
That sounds like the Ed McCaffrey I know, man. That guy was an absolute beast, an absolute baller. Another contested catch guy that, I remember his block. I forget against what team, but it was in the playoffs where he absolutely just laid a guy out and then just for extra disrespect, like stood over him and looked at him as he was doing it. And that just describes everything he needs to know about like Ed McCaffrey at that time. Rod Smith was the guy getting all the major targets and the guy that was the undrafted guy that turned out to be one of the best receivers in Broncos history. But Ed McCaffrey was a guy with major juice.
I hear you, man. I hate talking about Broncos players though because I'm from KC. We got them Chiefs here.
Man,
go ahead.
To even get into that, like, dude, okay, so I am so torn every time I watch a Broncos game against the Kansas City Chiefs at this point because I love Patrick Mahomes, but I hate the Chiefs. so like, I don't know what to root for, or where to root for. Like, Patrick Mahomes is going to, I think, go down, barring like significant injury that keeps this guy out like seasons. I think he's going to go down as easily first ballot Hall of Famer. And I'm saying that like 2-3 years into his career. Like, the guy has shown that he is absolutely one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But But yeah, just seeing this as a Bronco fan, and I imagine we're gonna have Tua Tagovailoa in the conference as well pretty soon, or in the division as well pretty soon, maybe on the Chargers. So it's gonna be tough, man. I'm just hoping Drew Lock can maybe do something. Maybe that defense can maybe just rally your boys a little bit, but I'm not hopeful for it.
It's okay. I got all my family from Iowa though, so I do got mad respect for Noah Fant. So you got that going for you.
There we go.
But yeah, let's wrap up Michael Pittman. So basically, just in a nutshell, okay, he is a big-bodied, strong-handed, contested catch wide receiver he's not gonna have any problem with press coverage or anything like that. But his route tree leaves stuff to desire. You know, he had a late breakout age, which shows that he isn't always the most adaptable to new situations. Worries us maybe on that transition into the NFL. But as a whole, 6'4", 223 pounds. We're looking at a good frame for a guy. But then we got to look at kind of his polar opposite. We're looking at Henry Ruggs now. He plays the entirely different kind of ball than Michael Pittman does. Let's just kind of look at some of his metrics right here. He's 5'11", 188 pounds of sheer explosion, man. For his height, he had a good arm radius. He had 30.5-inch arms with ungodly large hands. That dude's got 10 and an 1/8 inch hands at 5'11". Good for you, Henry Ruggs. It's just nuts. I get taken back by that every single time. But let's go into his combine numbers here. Everybody knows the story with him. His 40, he ran a 4.27 40, which is just lightning fast. It's in the top 8 fastest 40s of all time. And in my personal opinion, I think that he could have ran faster. I think he anticipated coming into this running faster. What do you think about that?
He was disappointed with it. Yeah, he was definitely disappointed with that time. He thought he could do better. And, I mean, I'm not going to be the guy that say he can't. Like, this guy was absolute roadrunner on the football field. Like he just burned people and they didn't even realize what was happening at the time. And I think that's the speed that very easily translates to the NFL. Just to go more into his metrics, yeah, he had a 4.27 40-yard dash. He had 110 speed score. He had a 136.9 burst score. Both of those are above the 90th percentile. I mean, this guy's an absolute blur. I don't want the Broncos to draft him, though. And this is why, because he's actually being mocked to the Broncos a lot. I think that he needs to be in a very particular system to get the best out of him. A lot of people compare guys like him to Tyreek Hill, but for every Tyreek Hill, there's a John Ross. There is a guy that has these afterburners that seem completely unstoppable, but isn't really able to put it together at the NFL level. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the case with Henry Ruggs, but I think that one thing that gets often overlooked with rookies is landing spot matters more than anything. Honestly, everything that we're talking about right now, breakout age, what this guy's 40 time was, his hand size, what he could do at the collegiate level, that's all fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, if this guy ends up, I don't know, a Seattle Seahawk battling with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, what are we really looking at there, But if he ends up in a situation with a quarterback that is going to be good, or at least we think is going to be good, then everything can absolutely change. But it has to do with what the coaches think about this player. And that's one thing that goes often overlooked when doing our analysis on rookies. Doesn't matter what you think. It matters what the guy calling the plays thinks. And that's where I think we need to really, really get this together when looking at a guy like Henry Ruggs that has such a large range of outcomes that I think it's where he goes is going to be the number one thing that I look at when deciding whether or not I'm drafting him in rookie drafts in 2020.
I think that is you use the term range of outcomes when you look at him. And I think that's the biggest thing to focus on with Henry Ruggs is that I think that's why he's so volatile on draft Twitter, fantasy Twitter, because when you're looking, you've got people that have got him all the way up at like wide receiver number 2, 3. And then you've got people that got him down at like 10, 12 and stuff, and it's just because you're so right about that. Landing spot is just crucially important to what happens. But the funny thing is, I thought he might be a great Bronco. I'd like him there, I guess difference of opinions, but yeah, you got Drew Lock throwing to him, so we better hope that works out.
Drew Lock has himself an arm. So if he's looking to get it deep to him and they decide to go that route, I mean, yeah, Noah Fant is definitely going to be eating up the seam. Cortland Sutton, I think, is Mr. Do-It-All a little bit at that X receiver spot. Henry Ruggs could potentially make a good Y. I just don't know if our offensive philosophy is what is going to put Henry Ruggs in the best positions to be a good player. Like, you're going to have to set up bubble screens. You're going to have to do a lot of things moving the defensive line, whether that's, through shifts, whether that's through motions. You're going to have to be creative with a guy like Henry Ruggs. And I just don't necessarily know if we have that same level of creativity. If you were to go to Kansas City, for example, I'm buying all day because Andy Reid.
I don't know if we can pull off 3 sub-6 foot wide receivers though. That'd be a spectacle right there. But hey, talking about your boy Drew Lock, I'm from Independence, Missouri, so I butt up next to Lee Summit where he's from. So we got a little hometown boy thing going on there. But let's take a look at Henry Ruggs' collegiate career at Alabama. His freshman season, he doesn't have much to show, but his sophomore season kind of started out what he was going to do for the rest of his career there. He had 46 receptions for 741 yards and 11 touchdowns. And then in his junior year, he had 40 receptions for 746 yards and 7 touchdowns. And so, no breakout age is one thing that we were talking about earlier. But the thing that we need to focus on here when we're looking at Alabama versus USC is the level of competition that Jerry Jeudy had to deal with when he was dealing with his teammates. He had some of the best wide receivers in the NCAA to compete with.
Oh yeah, and that definitely needs to be taken into context as well. So if you happen to not already be acclimated with the breakout finder, that's probably something that you need to do. That's just another thing out there, another tool out there that shows you what the teammates on that team can actually do in limiting potential prospects' viability at the NFL level. That said, you can't pretend like he's not going to be playing with other elite college receivers in the NFL as well. Everybody he's playing with in the NFL was an elite college receiver at some point in their career. So if we're going to say that, okay, well, this is the reason why he didn't produce, then what's really changing in that? I think the thing with Henry Ruggs is kind of what I was saying before. You're going to have to get him in situations where he doesn't have to deal with press coverage, where he doesn't have to deal with hand fighting, allowing him to get the step on DBs that aren't necessarily going to be able to get their hands on him at the line of scrimmage, because I think when you do that with Henry Ruggs, you completely shut him down. You slow him down, you mess up the timing, and at that point, there's really nothing that you can do in the play as a quarterback to get the ball to him because it just takes him too long to get open. But if you can get him free releases at the line, if you can do what Kansas City does with Tyreek Hill, and every once in a while, go ahead and move him into the slot or shift him in a way that makes it impossible for the DB to be right up on him at the line of scrimmage, then I think you've got a real star in Henry Ruggs. It just matters how the coach decides to use this guy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Because as I've seen watching film on him, if he gets jammed up at the line in press coverage, he is not able to overcome that. But, following into that, he doesn't have the strength to be able to overcome that kind of press coverage, but he is aggressive, man. You would think that at his size, with 5'11" and 188 pounds, that he would be shying away from hits. But, dude, he's attacking it. He's charging into it like a damn bull.
I think you need that. I'm not a big guy myself, so you always kind of have the mentality of, okay, well, if I'm going to walk in a room with these giants, what's the way that I'm going to stand out? I'm going to have to play like a bully. I'm going to have to play bigger than I am just to show these guys that I'm not afraid of contact and that I'm able to dish it out just as much as I can take it. Because if you don't do that, then people are going to take advantage of you at every step of the way, and you're not even going to get a chance to be at a premier football program like Henry Ruggs was. So, yeah, you definitely need to have that dog in you being that size, and I do definitely think that was a great point that you brought up. He definitely does.
And I that's one thing in the episodes that I've had leading up to this, the number one thing that I talk about when I'm looking at wide receivers, like you were talking about with Ed McCaffrey earlier, where he laid that block and stood over him and stared at him. That's stuff that I love that I've seen in T. Higgins, that I've seen in Justin Jefferson, and that I've seen in Henry Ruggs. I like a gritty wide receiver. I don't like somebody that goes down right after they catch the ball. I like somebody that can make a move and go and take a hit and keep on moving after the catch. That's what I love about the wide receiver position, is when you can see somebody just getting nasty out there.
Oh yeah.
And so I guess we'll give it a little bit of a conclusion on here with him. Henry Ruggs he's a speedster at 5'11", 188 pounds. He makes great space. His route running is something that we didn't touch on a whole bunch, but I think that he has exceptional route running. Aside from the fact that he gets jammed up at the line, if you get him open after that, if you give him a little bit of space, a little bit of a cushion, he's going to eat you alive every single time. And so he's got great route running ability. He's got great hands. He's got, electric speed, but he's a smaller guy that never had a breakout age. And so that's kind of where we're sitting with him. So when we're looking at the speedster versus the power man and Michael Pittman, I'm going to give this one to you. Who you got?
I'm going to go with where the NFL is going to go with this one. And the NFL is going to go with Henry Ruggs. Marquise Brown taught us this last year. Speed kills. Speed is what the NFL wants right now. And if you're able to provide that speed, everything else ideally can be worked out. Now, that's not always the case, but I think draft capital is going to give him the opportunity to produce earlier in his career. And like I was saying before, when I'm investing a first-round draft pick in Dynasty, I want a guy to produce as early in his career as possible. So if I need to, I can get that back out at the end of the year. So I think that it's definitely by a mile Henry Ruggs in this case, even though, 2-3 years down the line, maybe there's not such a discrepancy between the two of them.
I completely agree with you. My heart says Michael Pittman because I'm a sizist. I love big-bodied wide receivers that can get in there and rub. But, the logic, my mind, it has to go with Henry Ruggs because, he has those intangibles that the NFL is looking for right now.
Every time I get stuck in like a size speed type thing, I think about Dorial Green Beckham, and it brings me back to earth a little bit. It makes me just realize, okay, maybe size, maybe speed isn't everything.
Okay, so you didn't have to do that to me right now, okay? Because all my boys watch my podcast, okay? We've been playing Dynasty Fantasy Football for a while now. We got a bunch of leagues, and we had one startup league in, I think it was 2016 maybe, was the year that we started it up. Would that have been DGB's second year in the league, was 2016?
Let me find out for you.
Okay. Yeah, but so regardless, the startup draft that we had, I took DGB with a 4th-round startup pick. And
that was the second year, 2015.
2015, okay, yeah. And so I took him with a 4th-round startup pick, and I have not heard the end of it since then. I thought he was going to be great, man, and my boys are all going to roast me because you just mentioned his name. I literally heard about it today in the group chat. In the group chat today, they mentioned it. Oh,
hey, you know what? Don't even feel bad. I did the same thing with Corey Davis in one of my leagues year after he was a rookie. So I thought he was going to break out in the second year. I looked at that Titans offense. I was like, hey, there's nobody here. If the guy's going to catch passes, he's going to catch passes here. And it just didn't happen for him. Like, Peter Howard is a good friend of mine. If you follow him on Twitter, if you watch him on Twitter, a lot of his work pretty much revolves around the singular point that there's no such thing as vacated targets. Like, vacated targets don't matter. And I don't know if I'm 100% there with him on that, but I get where he's coming from because the wide receiver's skill in attracting a target is a skill in itself. That needs to be known. Just because a guy leaves, if this guy isn't an alpha number one taking up that spot, like, you cannot expect the same level of production with these two separate guys. So I think that we need to, as a collective dynasty community, talk less about just moving volume from this guy to the next and talk more about what can this guy do specifically. How does he win in the NFL specifically? And why is that a valued asset on my team moving forward?
I completely agree, man. Yeah, that's a really good point. But let's move it on though. Let's get on to the next. Let's get on to our running back bracket challenge where we've got Zach Moss versus the newly anointed candidate here with Anthony McFarland. Okay, we'll start it off with Zach Moss. He is a bruising running back at 5'9" and 223 pounds. He's got 9 1/4 inch hands, which aren't huge, and he's got 7 fumbles over his 4 years in college. But, he's got a lot of other things going for him. He was the number one tackle breaker in this draft class in 2019. We'll go over his combine numbers here. He ran a 4.65 40 at the combine with 19 reps on the bench, a 33-inch vertical, and a 4.37 short shuttle. That 40 is a little bit concerning, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and in my time as a sales manager, I've heard of the thing that you do when talking about people. When it's something you don't necessarily like, you start with like a compliment sandwich. So I'm going to try to compliment sandwich Zach Moss here. 4.65 40-yard dash. I think he was hurt at the time. I think it came out that he was hurt at the time when he was running at the 40. So I don't necessarily know how close that is to his actual his actual grade, what he would have gotten had he been completely healthy running that 40. But what you brought up with tackle breaker, this kind of goes back to my argument about wide receivers and why we like contested catch scenarios when something needed to go wrong for contested catch scenario to have. Same thing with running backs that are elite tackle breakers. Who was the elite tackle breaker last year? David Montgomery, right? He gets the NFL, and we find out, he was an elite tackle breaker because this dude cannot get away from guys. He always is in a situation to get tackled, so he just learned to be good at breaking tackles. And I think that's the same thing with Zach Moss. You have a guy here who isn't necessarily the fastest, isn't the burstiest, doesn't have that size speed that you really want. But I don't necessarily think that he's not going to be a value player in the NFL. I just think that he's never going to get the opportunity to be a bell cow, to be a workhorse. I think if you want the best out of Zach Moss, again, going back to the Chargers, you find a team that has a scat back, that has that elite agility type dude to make those outside runs, and you let Zach Moss just be the dude that you send through the line, just straight up the gut and at the goal line to go ahead and get you those value touches. But, I mean, just from a holistic perspective, if you're looking for this guy to be a 3-down back, I don't think he has that skill set in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I've been beating the drum constantly on fantasy Twitter saying that if you don't like David Montgomery, you can't like Zach Moss, because they are just replicas of each other. But you were making a good point about landing spot earlier. You were talking about landing spot being the ultimate defining trait of a draft capital, I mean, you look at that. We've seen people like LeGarrette Blount in New England be able to just hammer it in and have huge fantasy production because he was able to just do what he was good at. But the thing that we were talking about the 40, and I just wanted to point out that of the top 20 running backs last season, and not a single running back had below a 4.55 40. Of the elite tackle breakers that we know in the NFL, we've got Fournette, Elliott, Henry, and Chubb. Fournette ran a 4.51, Elliott a 4.47, Henry a 4.54, and Chubb a 4.52. None of them were even close to that speed metric.
And that's the fear.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're worried about because especially he's breaking those tackles. He's having to fight in between space. And he doesn't have that speed to be able to burst in between the tackles, But let's look at his college career at Utah. His freshman year, he didn't do much, but his sophomore year, he broke on the scene with 214 carries, 1,173 rushing yards, and 10 touchdowns. And that's combined with 8 receptions for 50 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. And then followed it up with an even better senior career with 235 carries, 1,416 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns, all matched with 28 receptions, 388 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, Etan, the one thing that I want to make sure that everybody sees when they're coming into this is that you tell me, do you think that 388 receiving yards is a little bit of a slanted number?
Yeah, I think when you're on a team that doesn't have much around you, that you might get force-fed targets. If we're talking about guys that were force-fed targets in the NFL, I mean, Leonard Fournette, I don't think he's going to get 100-plus targets again. Melvin Gordon was said to be an elite pass catcher. Again, kind of force-fed targets because Phillip Rivers' ADOT was so low. Ezekiel Elliott was 2 years ago, like an amazing pass catcher because he got out of this volume. And then we found out when Tony Pollard joined that, hey, you know what? he may not be the best pass catcher at running back on this team. And I think that's kind of what you find with these guys. I compare Zach Moss, just like how Player Profiler compares Zach Moss, to Monty Ball, a guy that is super productive in college, did what he was asked to do in college, very, very good at doing that, but never quite broke the ceiling in the NFL. And I think that may be the future for Zach Moss as well. However, like we were alluding to before, if you put him in a tandem with a guy who can do the things that he can't, then I think you might have an actual player here, if not for 1 or 2 years, long enough to at least get that value back for you that you spent drafting him in. I don't think he's going to go any higher than the 3rd round, honestly.
Right. No, I completely agree with you there. I mean, I guess let's just kind of wrap him up on that. I mean, he has decent vision. It's something that I haven't seen as a major concern with him. He's an elite tackle breaker. There's no arguing that. But unfortunately, he's got a less than stellar speed score. His hands are okay, but I think that he was force-fed. You gave a bunch of examples. Kind of reminds me of how Carlos Hyde got force-fed the ball when he was in San Francisco, even though he couldn't catch the ball worth a shit. But I mean, he does a lot of things well, but he's got a lot of negatives on him as well. And it's going to be system-based, landing spot based with where he goes. And then we look over at kind of a more elusive, a shiftier competitor that he's got. We're doing a lot of contrast here today. And we're looking at Anthony McFarland as his competitor. And, like I said, I made that sweeping declaration where I turned Anthony McFarland into our new competitor here as opposed to A.J. Dillon. And I haven't looked back since, because Anthony McFarland is fun to watch, man. He is an elusive running back at 5'8", 208 pounds with small-ass hands, 8 7/8 inches, and he's got 4 fumbles between 2018 and 2019. What do you think about Anthony McFarland, Etan?
I think Anthony McFarland fits the NFL, the new NFL, a little bit better than Zach Moss does, because he can be that pass catcher. He can be that elusive guy. He can be a little bit of a speed guy more than a guy like Zach Moss can be. Now, that said, I mean, in college, he was listed at 198. All of a sudden, he's 208. I don't know what number to really believe now. I don't know who's lying to me there, but somebody is. And if that's the case, then, I mean, what are we really looking at with his size? Because at the NFL, you kind of need to be 205, something in that range, to even be able to deal with that contact over and over and over again. We see these smaller guys at the RB position get washed out so quickly if they don't hit that threshold. Philip Lindsay, I'm sorry, this is taken out of context. Like, don't even listen. I know you're listening, but don't even listen to this. But honestly, it's the smaller guys that you have to worry about. So you just have to worry about durability in the National Football League. But I mean, when you look at what he was able to do in college, what he was able to accomplish in college, yeah, I really do think that he can be a top-level pass catcher in the NFL, and that's kind of what you want at the running back position if you're not necessarily expecting this guy to be your full bell cow. I think both of these guys are the complete opposite of the coin. If they both landed on the same team, I think then you have one complete running back, and I think that's kind of what needs to be taken in the back of your mind when looking at Anthony McFarland.
Right. Yeah. No, that is a great takeaway. But like I said, we're working on contrast today, and I think that there are other sides of the coin, But when we're talking about, you called him a little bit burstier. He's got that 4.44 second 40. He's got a 29.5-inch vertical, which is blah. 116-inch broad jump, which is fine. But we look at his freshman year after his redshirt year, and he put up 131 carries for 1,034 yards and 4 touchdowns, accompanied by 7 receptions, 73 receiving yards, and 0 touchdowns. His sophomore year, he had a down season, but this is all. You need to take this with context, because he had a high ankle sprain his sophomore season with 114 carries, 614 yards, and 8 touchdowns, accompanied by 17 receptions, 126 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. So, I mean, those are, in terms of popping off your freshman year after a redshirt year, those are pretty good numbers coming out of Maryland.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I don't think you should discount any one of these guys. If they're being looked at by NFL teams, there's obviously some talent to be had there. I just don't think that you're putting all your money, with this guy. If you're honestly looking to compete this year, this might be a drafted now 4 years down the line when some random running back gets hurt and he's then shoved into the RB1 role and coaches actually start to trust what this guy can do on the field, then I think you might have something. But if you're looking for an immediate impact from either of these guys, I'm not sure we're looking at the right guys here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we'll just get a little bit more into other things about him. Somebody that I kind of compare him to, and this isn't a current NFL production, he kind of reminds me of a later round Keyshawn Vaughn. If you're liking what Keyshawn Vaughn is doing, and it ain't just the dreads, because I did think that they looked similar out there with the dreads when they were running. But it ain't just that. When you see them run, they do a lot of things similar. They have that same center of balance. They have the same. They don't go down on first contact. And I mean, all of those things that I see from them tell me that they've got the ability there, that they have, like you were talking about, a more NFL ready running style. But I mean, it scares me, especially you're talking about 198. Being sub 200 coming into the NFL. That's a scary prospect. So, yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
But no, so like I said, his sophomore season was hampered by a high ankle sprain. A few things that I will say that he seems like he's lacking in is that he's a lackluster pass blocker. He seems like he doesn't have a nose for the end zone. A lot of the things that I've watched with him is that between the 20s, he's aces. He's a big play waiting to happen every single time. But once you get him into the red zone, he just seems like he can't punch it in. And I don't understand what that is. I don't know if it was an offensive line problem. I don't know if it's a him problem, but it's definitely something that I saw repeatedly in his red zone production, But I mean, like you said, he's bursty. He's got a lot of the stuff that the NFL likes. I mean, why don't I let you conclude him, give him a little sum up.
Oh yeah. He I think fits the modern NFL offense. If you're looking for a scat back, you're looking for an elusive guy that can potentially be a pass catcher for you. But what you were saying about him being beastie before you hit the red zone, I think that has a lot to do with like defenders' feelings. Like you're not hurting defenders' feelings putting yards up on them. Like they don't give a shit at all about the yards you put on them. What they do care about is you getting across that goal line. And I think that in tandem with potential offensive line play, I'd have to look at the numbers to see how accurate that is. But yeah, that could mean a lot for it. There are guys that don't have that grit, don't have that nastiness to be able to get it over at the goal line. But lucky for him, I don't think he's going to be put in that situation very often. I think he's going to be put in a situation where he's not even getting the reps when you get in the 20s. That is going to be a reserve for somebody that's 225 and isn't 198 and masquerading like he's 208.
I like that, though. I would have never thought about something about the defender's feelings on that. That's a great way to put it. And so, I mean, concluding Anthony McFarland, we got to make a vote here. And like I said, I'm going to give it to you, Etan. Eden, which one are we going with?
I'm fully in the camp of Anthony McFarland here, and that's just because I see more for him playing in PPR leagues. I just want those receptions, and I think he's going to be able to do that given enough time in the NFL. I think he is more of a fit for more teams than Zach Moss is. I think Zach Moss needs to land in a prime position. I think Anthony McFarland just needs to land in a situation where he is the pass catcher in that backfield. He doesn't necessarily have to worry about somebody else being that premier pass catcher in that backfield. And if that's the case, then hey, I mean, all goes for him. All goes for him. So if he lands, in Jacksonville with Leonard Fournette, I'm a big Leonard Fournette proponent, so I hope this doesn't happen. But if he does, then I really think that there's an opportunity for him to be that short route, just get it out quickly, blitz pickup type of guy. Even if he can't necessarily do those things right now, I think he'd be coached up to be a decent addition to a team like that.
And this is crazy because I'm glad I got you on here. I don't know if I would have had the guts to be able to put Anthony McFarland over Zach Moss, but I was thinking the exact same thing. I love being able to watch Anthony McFarland's tape. Just tells me, I love this guy. And just him compared to Zach Moss just seems like he's going to be a David Montgomery 2.0, And so I'm really excited that you made the call and I didn't. Everybody heard it. But
Direct the hate towards me. Direct the hate towards me. I'll take it.
But so let me check real quick. I'm gonna give our viewers where the bracket is going next week. We are on to our second round of the losers bracket. We've got Joshua Kelly versus Eno Benjamin, and then in the wide receivers bracket, we've got Laviska Shenault versus Brian Edwards, and I couldn't be more excited about that one. So one last question with you. Because I want to get all the information that I can get out of you while I got you here. What is one little Easter egg that you can provide our viewers with? In this rookie draft, who is one guy that you were way higher on than the rest of the people?
God, I wish I could say I was the one to bring this up, but I mean, this is almost common knowledge at this point. There's one running back in the NFL that's being paid like a wide receiver right now. His name is Christian McCaffrey. He just got a $16 million a year for 4 years contract. Why? Because he's kind of like a wide receiver. I mean, he plays like a wide receiver. If there's one guy in this class who can do that, and a lot of people are going to be angry because Jonathan Taylor is apparently, the fastest guy we've ever seen in our lives, and I get it. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire is probably the one guy that can play like Christian McCaffrey. He's probably the one guy that can serve that dual-purpose role that I think makes you a 3-down back in the NFL. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, being on one of the best offenses of all time in college football probably didn't help his numbers. I think that's disingenuous to say that that's the case. And I think the same thing needs to be said about Justin Herbert, about Justin Jefferson. The same thing needs to be said about Joe Burrow. The same thing needs to be said about everybody in that offense. But still, it happened. We saw it with our own eyes. And if this guy gets in a situation where he is picked maybe in the 3rd, 4th round, maybe to a team that doesn't necessarily need a back but is willing to take a shot at that point, maybe the Kansas City Chiefs, then I think that we see a full 3-down back in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And looking down the line, looking into his second contract, most running backs don't even get there, but looking into a second contract, if there's a guy who can still be a valued asset at that point, I think it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Oh, yeah, man. That's somebody that I'm going to have to go back because, I respect you guys' opinion wholeheartedly. It's somebody that I've been down a little bit on, but, your opinion means a lot. So I'm going to go back and take a look at him because you're right. I mean, this huge contract that we're seeing Christian McCaffrey get is because he's the first person who's deserved it. He's the first person who's done everything that you wanted him to do out there on the field. He's Le'Veon Bell 2.0, doing more than he could ever do and not having problems off the field. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to thank you again for coming on to the show. It was a great pleasure of mine to have you on. I think that you provided an awesome insight into the numbers of this thing that I don't always have because I just watch a lot of film, And so thank you very much for coming on. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you guys have coming out soon?
Oh, yeah. Before I do that, though, I just want to say, man, meeting you, having this discussion with you, I got super hyped up. I got super excited. This is an awesome show. I'm really, really glad that I was able to find you guys. And, man, you produce an awesome show here. If you're talking about whether or not I should be listened to or somebody else should be listened to, I throw all of that out the window. I've spoken to so many people in the fantasy community at this point and just in life at this point that I've come to the realization that everybody that you speak with, every individual person that you speak with has something invaluable to teach you and something invaluable to show you that not every other person out there has. And so just, ingratiate yourself with as many people as you can, because you don't know what you'll learn from somebody until you actually make that connection. So there's nobody that is more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable. I don't think. I think people just have different shades of knowledge, different shades of what they're best at. And that's why it's so important to be able to just speak with and be around as many diverse people as you absolutely can. Going into what I do and kind of what I'm planning to do going forward, Dynasty Diagnostic is a podcast I started just about a year and a half ago, something like that. I'm not too good with timelines, so don't hold me to that. But whatever it is. And the reason that I started the podcast is because I heard so many things out in the Dynasty landscape that, talked about player X or player Y or team X and team Y, but never actually turn the focus to people's individual teams, never actually turn the focus to, okay, here is actionable advice that you in this situation should probably be thinking about moving into this new dynasty year or whatever it is that you were trying to do, whether you're a win now team or a team that maybe has a couple of years of rebuilding to do or so on and so forth. So that's what I wanted to start. And as it's kind of gone on, it's grown, and I've realized that another thing that I wanted to add to the podcast and what I'm kind of trying to do now in having all these guests on my podcast, if you mentioned Matthew Berry, we also had Rich Rebar on pretty recently. Not too long from now, you'll hear Graham Barfield. We also have TJ Hernandez coming up on the pod pretty soon. All of these guys just have a wealth of knowledge about specific things in fantasy. And as I was saying before, there are so many things out there that you can pick up from person A, person B, person C, and put it all together. So what I'm trying to do is trying to find the experts, the absolute experts, which I am not, in any one of these particular things that interest you, and kind of getting their take on it and see whether or not you need to adjust how you look at that and how you analyze that, how you put that into your overall process of looking at a certain player. So yeah, I'm just trying to kind of do like a bit of a fantasy 101 from as many different perspectives as I can get, and approach that and have that go towards the rebuilding or the making of a championship roster for you specifically out there.
Oh yeah, man. Well, that sounds awesome. And I mean, everything that you guys do over there, I'm a huge fan of. I love the way that you guys approach it. I love the personal level that you guys approach it on. I've actually had guys that I talked to specifically that have said that they've sent their rosters to you, and you've actually analyzed their roster and told them that you'll try and get it onto the show. So it's awesome that you guys do that. I mean, I'm a huge fan over here, and just everybody go check out the Dynasty Diagnostic and go use the Dynasty Trade Calculator, all that stuff. I mean, thanks for coming on the show, Etan.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick.
Have a good day, man.